As you've probably heard by now, Notion finally released the public beta version of their API, which has been something that the entire Notion community has been looking forward to for years now. And so I spent yesterday evening building an automation that synchronizes your Google Calendar events to a Notion calendar database. Now, as a disclaimer, this is not a perfect solution, and there will definitely be a better way to do this in the future. This is just what I have come up with in this short amount of time. And since the functionality of the API is still limited, I don't know how much of a better solution you can develop, at least not using automation tools like Zapier. But I think it gets the job done, and that's why I wanted to show it to you. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Now, there are a couple of things that you need for this automation to work. First of all, you need a calendar database or some sort of database in Notion that has a date property assigned to it. You will need a Zapier account where you can create these automations. And you also will need to create the integration between Zapier and Notion. Now, this can be done by going to this developers page where you can manage your integrations. I showed this in the last video already, but pretty much what you have to do is you have to create a new integration. And if you have set this up already, then you don't need to do this. But if you're new, set up an integration, and then you will have the option to get this internal integration token, which you can then use inside of Zapier to authenticate your Notion account and to create the connection between the two tools. Once you've done that, you can go back to your Notion workspace, and here you can go to the database that you actually want to use this integration with, or the automation. And this is because you have to share the database with the automation. And this works similar to sharing a page with guests, for example. You just go up to the share menu, and then you click on this add people, emails, group, or integrations button. And then you have like a list of people and integrations that you can choose from. Now, as you see, I have added this already, so I don't need to change anything about that. But if you haven't added that before, then this is where it should appear in order to actually work. Let's now get started with the actual automation. And I have to add another disclaimer here because this is a bit advanced, and if you don't know much about Zapier, then it might get a bit confusing. I have created a short video on Zapier though, so if you don't know anything about Zapier, then watch this introduction video first. It will be linked in the video card up above. Also, I'll be launching a Zapier 101 course in the near future that will help you, get started with Zapier, like discovering all the tools that Zapier has to offer, and that will help you get started with building automations that can save you time and do the tedious work for you. If that sounds interesting to you, then you can just follow me on Twitter at Janosch, or you can also subscribe to my newsletter where I'll be updating you on how this course is progressing and when it's going to be launched. You can find the link to both of those in the description down below. But now let's see how we can build this automation. So I'm in my Zapier account, and I'm going to go to this Zap that I've created already, and I'm going to walk you through what it actually does, because we will have to create a couple of different automations in order to make this work in a good way. The first one is the adding new Google Calendar events to Notion. And that's because we want to get as close to a real two-way synchronization as possible. So that means that we want to send the events from one tool to the other one, and also we want to kind of change the events in the different tools when we change them in one of them. So if we create a Google Calendar event, we want that to appear in Notion, but also if we change the Google Calendar event, we want these changes to be reflected in Notion as well. And so that's why we have to create these different automations. And we're going to start off with the Google Calendar events to Notion integration or automation. So the first step is the trigger. And we are going to trigger this for new or updated events in Google Calendar. And this is really important because we want to distinguish between the new and the updated events. And this is also why in the second step, we are actually adding a filter. And what that does is for the times that this automation runs where the filter criteria isn't met, then it will just stop. And if it's met, then it will go on and do step 3 and 4. So let's check out what this actually does. In here, it says that the automation only continues if the updated field doesn't exist. Now, what does this mean? Well, the updated field is a piece of data that we get from the trigger event. So from this Google Calendar event that has been added to our Google Calendar. And it pretty much is a way to find out if this is a new event or an updated event. Because if the updated property exists, then we know that it is a updated version of a previously added event. And I hope that doesn't sound too complicated, but it just lets us know that this is not an updated event because this property doesn't exist in the trigger step. Therefore, we are pretty much only continuing if this is a new Google Calendar event. All right, so with that out of the way, you see in this case, the SAP would have not continued. This is because the demo data that I used was indeed an updated event, so everything's fine there. All right, so let's close this down and let's go to the next step. Now remember, this is when we are adding in a new Google Calendar event. So here we are actually choosing Notion and we are creating a database item. Which makes sense because we want to add this event to our Notion calendar as well. This is where you will have to enter in the API key from Notion that you get. So this is where you will have to do that if you have never connected your Notion account. And now for the action, what we're going to do is in the database, so we can quickly go back to the database. There's not much to this, so there's not much information that you can add here. We have the name of the of the page of the entry. We have the date. We have tags, but we don't even use them. And then we have like the page content. We just fill in this information with the information that we get from Google Calendar. So we chose the calendar database. Then the name is going to be the name of the Google Calendar event. The date is going to be the start time of our Google Calendar event. And then the content will be the description. Now, if the description is empty, then there will be no data in here, as you see right here. But if there is a description for this event, then it will be added to the Notion page as well. Now, the last step and also the most complicated step is this set value step. And I'm going to give my best to explain this in simple terms, but it might be confusing for some people. But again, I'll try my best to explain this. The first question you might have is, why do we even need this additional step? We have added the database item in Notion, so everything should be fine, right? Well, to understand this, we have to go to the other automation that we are going to be creating, which is the change updated event in Notion. So this is the automation where if somebody changes the event in Google Calendar, then this update should also be reflected in Notion. Because if this isn't reflected, then the two calendars aren't really in sync. And if you change something in Google Calendar and you see something different in Notion, then that doesn't make much sense. So this is why we will have to add this step as well. And in order to actually find out which item to update, we need the ID of the item. So what we're basically doing here is we're again doing the same thing. We are triggering this automation when there is a new event or like a new or updated event. Then in this case, we are actually filtering out only the events that were updated. So in this case, if you remember in the last step, we set this to updated doesn't exist, but in this case, we set it to updated does exist. And now you also see that the Zap would have continued in this case. And this means that we now have an event that was updated and that we want to change in Notion. So now we have an event in Google Calendar that has been updated. And what we now need to do is we need to find out what this event corresponds to in our Notion database, because we have already created this event there and we want to update it. So in order to do this, we need to kind of find the item in the Notion database. And the only way you can do this right now is by giving Zapier the actual value of this, the ID of the database entry, the database page. And in order for this to kind of work, and in order for us to know which ID we have to give it, we have to kind of save this somewhere. So we have to save the values in some storage location, in some kind of database where you can look this up. And this is where storage by Zapier comes in, where we actually have to save this in. So going back to this fourth step here, this is where we actually set this value. So we actually have the value stored for each of the new events. And then in the other automation, we can take a look at this table using like the ID of the Google Calendar event, and then we can find the ID of the corresponding Notion page or Notion database entry. So again, basically what we do in here is we try to relate this ID of the Google Calendar event to the ID of the Notion database entry. And so we have like this value pair, and we know that this ID corresponds to this Notion database entry. In the other Zap, we are going to use this ID of the Google Calendar event to look up the value that corresponds to this. And this is then the value that we can add in to this step to update the database item in Notion. So to sum up again, we have two automations, one for adding in the new Google Calendar events to Notion and one for updating the existing ones. And again, we have to create a relation between the ID of the Google Calendar event and the ID of the Notion database entry, so that if we want to update the Notion database, we know which of the database entries we have to update. So I know that this is a lot to take in and a lot of really complicated stuff, especially if you're not that technical. But to make it easier for you, I will provide the Zaps as downloads in the description down below, so you can actually just check them out and just add them into your workspace or like your Zapier account, and then you can use them for yourself. You don't have to worry too much about the automation and how to like set it up. You just have to plug in your data pretty much, and then you should be good to go. And also feel free to leave any questions if you feel unsure about something. I'm here to help, and I want you to be able to do this. So now we've only covered how to add in Google Calendar events into Notion, but not how to add Notion events into Google Calendar. And I've created a simple automation for this as well, which I'm quickly going to go over. It's not quite as robust as the other integration, so this is a bit hacky and doesn't really work too well, but I think it gets the job done for now. So let me show you how this works. In this case, we are actually triggering when there's a new database item in Notion. So pretty much the other way around. And then we are just adding this event to Google Calendar. Now we have the action set to find or create event in Google Calendar, because if this event is already there, then we don't want to add it to the Google Calendar. And here it's important that you add in the right information. So you want to search for the item with this step. So search for the name of the item that you added to the Notion calendar, and then add in the start time as the time that you want to add. Add in an end time as well, if that's possible. And you can also add lots of other information, but we don't need this for now. The important thing here is that you have to be quick to add the time of the event. Because if you go in here, if I click on this button, that is pretty much when the Zapier integration is getting triggered. And sometimes it takes a couple of minutes for it to actually run. So that's the time you have to enter in the information, to enter in the date. And if you don't do that, if you just add the item like this, and then don't add the time, then it will just be a full day event, or it will get it will look weird in your Google Calendar. So that's something that doesn't work too great for now, but I think we'll have to live with it. And I think it will also not take too long until there's like a proper Google Calendar integration for Notion, and then you also won't be able or won't need to do it like this anymore. Alright, so that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you want to learn more about these different use cases of using the Notion API, then please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. And if you want to learn more about what I do, then you can follow me on Twitter at Janosch, and you can also subscribe to my newsletter, which is linked in the description down below, just like my Twitter. Alright, that's it for this one, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.